I was sitting on a wooden chair outside a little cafe in Sedona, letting the dry desert air settle deep in my lungs. Mornings here have a way of convincing you that peace isn't a concept. It's a temperature, a color, a rhythm. The sunlight wasn't harsh. It looked like someone had pulled it through a thin linen cloth before pouring it onto the red rock ground in soft streaks. It was nothing like the ocean I had worked beside for 14 years. No waves crashing, no salt wind stinging your eyes, no distant engines humming. Just a desert breeze and the faintest trace of sagebrush drifting through the air. When you have spent years bracing for storms, Sedona feels like a gift wrapped in quiet. My name is Elaine Carter, 42, Maritime Safety Coordinator for the Borealis Research Center. The job sounds far from land, but I have spent most of my life at sea, reviewing operations files, checking protocols, and sometimes handling the kind of situations most people would run from. 3 years ago, I pulled an entire survey crew through a sudden storm nearly 20 nautical miles off the coast. I am not one to tell heroic stories, but that day, if I had not noticed the wind shift when I did, we could have ended up as a sad little headline somewhere. I used to think moments like that earned people like me more respect, but you know how it is. Sometimes the ocean is easier to predict than people. I am the quiet type, steady, careful, and principled. Not because I am rigid, but because I have lived too long in a world where one careless move can get someone hurt. My sense of humor runs dry, the kind that makes people unsure whether I am joking or just tired. Honestly, it is a survival instinct. When things get absurd, a little sarcasm keeps you sane. But I am not unbreakable. Ever since I was injured at sea, big waves sometimes trigger a quick, sharp tension in my body, like a wounded animal remembering the source of the pain. It never stopped me from doing my job. I am good at what I do, and I say that with both feet on the ground. That morning, I was taking a local painting class. I have never been an artist, but standing in front of a blank canvas gives me a kind of stillness the ocean never could. My breakfast, eggs and avocado, and beans with a touch of green chili, sat beside me. Everything was so calm I could hear someone's brush sliding across their canvas a few feet away. Then my phone buzzed. One vibration, but it felt like a rock dropping into a canyon. I almost ignored it. This was my first real vacation in 14 years, a full 2 weeks. But habit won, and so did instinct. The email was from Paxton Hale, the new director of the center. I had met him exactly 3 times. The subject line practically yelled at me. An immediate meeting is required because of critical concerns. I checked the date. I checked the note at the top of the message. He knew I was on approved leave. He had signed it himself. I exhaled and set my brush down. The email read like a man pulling every fire alarm in the building. I read it once, then again. Still nonsense. I replied the way I always do, calm and factual, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I stated that I was on approved leave and would return on the scheduled date. No extra apologies, no over explanation, just the truth. I did not expect a response. New bosses often think authority means everyone must jump whenever they point. But an hour later, while I was deciding whether to buy a cowboy hat for my mother, the phone buzzed again. I opened the message without thinking. Termination notice. No greeting, no meeting, no discussion. Just a cold statement telling me my contract was ended for abandoning my duties. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not from joy, not from shock, but because it was so absurd, my mind chose laughter over anything else. 14 years without a real break, and they chose the day I finally picked out my first cowboy hat to fire me. Part of me wanted to walk back into the art class and ask if anyone wanted to sketch this moment. It deserved a frame. Peace is strange. Sometimes it comes from a perfect Sedona morning. Sometimes it comes from an email that should ruin your trip, but instead frees you from a loyalty no one bothered to return. And if you are still listening, I am curious. What state are you watching from? I want to know which corners of America this story has reached, because I believe every place has a version of it. Only the teller changes. When I left the sunburned red road of Sedona and walked back to the lodge, the termination email was still sitting on my screen like a joke that refused to end. But once the laugh faded, what stayed with me wasn't the fact that I had been fired. It was a much simpler question. Why did Paxton do it while I was on leave? People who are desperate to flex authority love to strike the moment they think you are at your weakest. But his message didn't read like a man asserting power. It read like someone trying to cover a very big mistake. I have been a maritime safety coordinator for 14 years. If a bolt on the radar was torqued a little off, if a depth sensor drifted half a degree, if a crew member logged the wrong number on a calm day, I was the first to catch it. Not because I was unbeatable, but because precision has always been my obsession. Out on the ocean, nothing forgives you for ignoring details. My coworkers trusted me, and my former director did too. He once said every survey that left port without an incident had my fingerprints on it somewhere. But Paxton Hale was different. He came from a smaller research center where procedures were simpler and pressure barely existed. 6 months into his new role as director, he tried to brand himself as modern, fast, and innovative. I suppose in his mind, running a survey vessel was no different from running a conference room. You give orders, and the world rearranges itself. I have met plenty of people like him. People who don't understand the job are terrified of being seen as not understanding, and so start fixing things that never needed fixing just to prove they belong. In his first month, he suggested shortening the navigation system checklist before departure. When I explained that the checklist existed because of repeated serious incidents, he looked at me the way someone looks at a person who insists on complicating life for no reason. Those conversations kept happening. Every time it became clearer, he had no technical foundation and no interest in building one. Yet somehow his signatures kept appearing on more and more critical operational files. I had no reason to suspect anything, but the technical teams occasionally let slip a tense comment. He wanted to cut inspection time. He pushed crews to finish faster than safety allowed. That sometimes he asked them to skip steps he deemed unnecessary. It all stayed as hallway whispers. Nobody had proof. I didn't think much of it either. Not until the morning in Sedona. A federal audit is no small thing. Inspectors don't just read documents, they cross check dates, timestamps, symbols, GPS coordinates, and weather logs. If anything doesn't match, they dig. I have been through 2 audits before, and I know exactly who the auditors call first when numbers don't make sense. They call me. Paxton knew that too. And if he had signed off on anything questionable in the past months, he would need someone like me to make the data look coherent. I wasn't in the office. I didn't see how frantic he became when the audit notice landed, but I can imagine what happened after he sent that urgent meeting request. And when I refused because I was on approved leave, that was probably the moment real panic set in. Audits don't wait for anyone. If he needed an escape hatch, I was that escape hatch. But he forgot something I never forgot. 3 years ago, after the storm that injured me, attorney Margot Hensley visited me in the hospital. She didn't waste words. She never does. But she explained one thing very clearly. People who work in the field carry higher risks than most. And to protect us, our contracts must be written so that anyone trying to push us beyond our limits will think twice. She recommended adding a special clause to my contract, Clause 11C. Its purpose was simple. If the center fired me during legally approved leave, claiming I failed to perform a duty, they would be required to pay full compensation and file an incident report with the Federal Regulatory Board. It was written to stop any supervisor from abusing staff during high-pressure seasons, especially when someone tried to drag them back from vacation to fix a mess they did not cause. I signed it without thinking it would ever matter. Margot knew better, and she told me something I still remember. The best contracts are the ones that protect the parts of you most likely to be taken advantage of. So that morning in Sedona, when I held the phone with that termination email, I realized Paxton had triggered a clause he never bothered to read. He believed firing me would erase a problem. In truth, he had just opened the door to problems he wasn't prepared to face. I laughed again, not out of relief, but because something finally made sense. Sometimes you don't need to lift a finger. You just stand still and watch someone pull the very rope they tied around their own ankle. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and looked at the termination email again. Nothing had changed since I first read it in the Sedona Cafe. The same clipped tone, the same digital signature from Paxton, the same cold confidence of someone who believes an email is enough to shut down a problem. People like that often forget one thing. Emails leave the clearest trail. I didn't hesitate long. I opened a new message, attached the entire chain, and forwarded it to Margot. One short note. Margot, it looks like Clause 11C just got triggered. My phone buzzed before I even lifted my hands from the keyboard. Margot's voice came through exactly the way I expected it. Calm, sharp, never wasting a single breath. Elaine, they just detonated Clause 11C themselves. She paused, letting me hear the quiet sound of a very large administrative door opening somewhere inside the federal system. I leaned back in my chair. I figured. The question is how far the blast carries. Margot gave me the short version. The center's email system follows federal standards, which means every personnel decision is automatically logged on the server. And contracts with special clauses like mine generate an extra copy sent to the Federal Administrative Oversight Office on schedule. There is no delete key powerful enough to interrupt that process. Honestly, there was nothing for us to do. The system would take care of the rest. Paxton sent the firing email. The server logged it. A flag went up. The Oversight Office received its copy. Every part of it moved like a machine that had been waiting for someone to push the button. Meanwhile, back at Borealis, the HR team was probably staring at Paxton's message, like they had stumbled onto a bomb they didn't know existed. And the first thing any panicked organization does is always the same. They call the technical team. Wilson was the one who walked into the room that day. A man with salt and pepper hair, few words, and a reputation for being the internal clock of the entire center. If something was off, he noticed before anyone else. And if anyone understood the system better than the person who built it, it was Wilson. A coworker later told me Wilson needed only a few minutes with the logs before he turned his chair around, rested his elbows on his knees, and let out a soft exhale. The kind of exhale from someone who has seen the same mistake play out too many times. The good news, Wilson said, his voice dry as desert wind, is that the system works exactly as designed. HR swallowed hard. Meaning what? Meaning, Wilson replied, the firing email is stored on the primary server, backed up to the secondary server, and like all high-level personnel decisions, the log has already been pushed to the Federal Administrative Office. Automatically. No human interaction, no errors. Silence flooded the room. Someone tried to regain composure. If we wanted to adjust anything, is that possible? Wilson stared at them for an extra beat, then gave a small, familiar smile. The kind of smile you give when someone asks for the impossible. If I attempt to edit or delete anything, he said, the system will record that attempt and send an additional log to the federal office. Which means right now we have one problem. If we try to hide it, we will have two. Right then, Paxton walked into the room. His face was drained, the look of a man who had just sprinted after a departing ship but did not catch it. Wilson turned toward him, calm as ever. Boss, he said, you just signed your own round-trip ticket. It wasn't a joke, and it wasn't a threat. It sounded more like a natural law being read aloud to someone who had been swimming against the current for far too long. Paxton didn't respond right away. My coworker said he simply stood there, hand tightening at his side, staring at the screen as if sheer focus could undo what he had done. But logs don't negotiate, and the federal system negotiates even less. As for me, 1,000 miles away, I was sitting on a flat red stone watching the sun sink behind the Sedona cliffs. I couldn't hear the argument unfolding in that meeting room. I didn't need to. Because the moment Margot said they just triggered Clause 11C on themselves, I knew the tide had shifted. Some waves you fight to survive, and some waves you simply stand still and watch to see who gets pulled under first. While I sat in Sedona sipping herbal tea more than 1,000 miles away at Borealis headquarters, a small chaos was spreading like a crack across glass. I did not need anyone to describe it for me. When someone like Paxton feels his authority slipping, he always hits the same two stages: panic and blame, and I knew he was caught right between them. About 10 minutes after Wilson announced that the log could not be erased, Paxton called an emergency meeting with everyone involved. His way of summoning people always had a certain flavor to it, that frantic energy of someone desperately trying to rewind life to 5 minutes before a mistake. A coworker told me Paxton nearly slammed the conference room door when he walked in, gripping a printed copy of his own email, the bolded decision line looking so loud it might as well have been highlighted. He did not start with an apology or clarity. He started with a sentence that made everyone in the room blink. We need to reshape the context of this email before the system sends out another copy. One sentence. Three serious problems in one breath: denial of responsibility, an attempt to rewrite an event that already happened, an admission that the system was already ahead of him. A coworker later told me the room froze for a moment, not out of fear, but pure disbelief. Not everyone has the nerve to make themselves look worse in real time. Paxton then began building a brand new story, talking so fast he probably could not remember half of what he said. He claimed the email did not express his true intent and insisted I had failed to meet a federal requirement, forcing him to take temporary action. It sounded like a story created simply to plug the dangerous hole he had just opened. But HR was not made of children. They knew federal systems do not care about true intent. They care about official documents and timestamps. The head of HR, a woman with 20 more years of experience than Paxton, slowly set her pen down and spoke with a calm sharpness that could cut glass. Erasing that email would be a legal violation. Creating a new narrative to justify an already sent email would be considered concealment. We will not do that. Paxton snapped toward her, stunned someone dared object. He immediately demanded that Wilson review every possible fallback option. Wilson, who had clearly dealt with this type of nonsense before, raised one eyebrow and brought up the screen. He opened the logs, scanned the lines of code, then turned the monitor toward the room. I repeat, he said, voice flat and dry as a desert after a failed monsoon. There is no fallback, no deletion, no editing, no hiding. Attempting any of the three triggers an additional log to the federal office. So if your goal is the smallest amount of trouble, this version is the smallest amount of trouble you will ever get. Someone from HR opened their mouth to ask something else, but stopped when the Slack archive popped up. They were reviewing saved conversations, something someone had opened earlier to check Paxton's role in previous workflow decisions. And then the first crack in his defense appeared. Quiet, clean, and devastating. A Slack exchange from 3 months earlier between Paxton and the technical team. Paxton: adjust the vessel log for day 11. The travel time does not need to be minute accurate. Just audit reasonably. Technical team: but the original was already approved. Paxton: then adjust it. No one reads every detail anyway. Below it was a screenshot, a side-by-side of the original log and the altered one. The screenshot had been taken by none other than Wilson, and even through secondhand retelling, I could picture his face as he looked at two overlapping logs, with edits so sloppy even a printer would want to reject them. Wilson stared at the image for a long moment, then delivered a line so soft only people who knew him would catch how deep the blade went. Even Excel from 2010 would not forgive that edit. The room fell silent. Not the silence of fear, the silence of recognition. The moment everyone quietly admits a truth they had been trying not to see. Paxton was not just uninformed. He was reckless, a very dangerous combination. Paxton tried to stand firm, but the eyes around the table had changed. When trust fractures, the first sound you hear is silence. He started circling, claiming the Slack conversation was simply an internal discussion. But everyone in that room knew audits do not distinguish internal from external. The moment data manipulation appears, the entire classification jumps to another level of seriousness. The head of HR placed her hand on the table and looked straight at Paxton. We will not delete anything, she said. And starting now, every discussion related to adjusting records must be logged. Altering operational data can be considered a federal violation. A coworker told me Paxton looked around the room like a man who had just realized the wooden floor beneath him was much thinner than he thought. He tried to speak, but no one stepped in to cushion him anymore. In Sedona, the sun was dropping, washing the red cliffs in a deep, burnished orange. I did not know every word exchanged in that meeting, but I knew the feeling. A ship was listing to one side while its captain blamed the wind instead of taking the wheel. Sometimes you do not need to expose someone. You just let them talk. The morning the audit team walked into Borealis, the atmosphere inside the building shifted immediately. They did not make a noise. They did not arrive with accusations. Just three people in plain shirts carrying tablets and a stack of folders. But their silence alone was enough to make every desk in the building instinctively lower the sound of its typing. They did not ask Paxton a single question at first. They headed straight to the operations data room and requested all vessel logs for the past 3 months. That part was normal, except for one detail. They asked for the originals and the complete edit history. That was when the room went still for a beat. File after file lit up in front of them. Every timeline showed who edited what, when it was edited, and what had changed. No one needed to explain what the auditors were looking for: consistency. And very quickly, they found the opposite. One of the auditors opened two screens side by side. On one side were the GPS coordinates for the vessel on day 11. On the other was the log Paxton approved. They were separated by several nautical miles, a distance too large to blame on a typo. No one spoke. Their eyes spoke enough. The auditors did not argue. They opened the weather data for the same day. Waves higher than 10 feet, winds shifting, movement advisories everywhere. And right next to it sat Paxton's report: stable journey, no unusual conditions. One auditor tilted his head and wrote a few short notes. They have not raised questions yet. They simply moved on to another date and repeated the process. The more files they opened, the wider the gap grew between real operational data and the numbers in the official logs. There was no need for theatrics. Truth carries its own weight. Paxton sat at the head of the table, not sweating anymore. He was something else now: rigid, flushed, then pale. His hands on the table twitched in uneven rhythms, not the rhythm of anger, but the rhythm of someone trying to predict a wind direction that had changed long before he noticed. When the auditors requested internal communications, the Slack archive opened a stream of messages. A senior engineer, one known for being almost painfully discreet, spoke up the moment he saw the conversation between himself and Paxton appear on screen. "This is the log from that day," he said, pointing at the screen. "The original is on the left. The one we were told to adjust is on the right." The auditors asked, "And who issued the request?" The engineer did not speak. He simply looked toward Paxton. It was not a hostile look, just the look of a man who had spent too long cleaning up somebody else's mistakes. A younger employee beside him lowered his head, gathering courage. I was also told to adjust the travel times. I did not want to. I was warned my performance rating would suffer if I refused." Paxton shot to his feet. That never happened. These were internal discussions, nothing official. One auditor kept the same. Even tone, like reading water temperature from a gauge. The edits were executed immediately after these messages, by user accounts acting under your authorization. No official memo is required. The system has already recorded it. A coldness settled over the room. Not physical cold, the kind you feel when every excuse has lost its usefulness. The auditors continued. They opened the route map for day 18. The GPS coordinates showed the vessel slowing sharply when passing a zone flagged for equipment risk. But the operations log showed steady speed. The auditor simply asked, "Who entered this line?" Paxton's name sat at the bottom. Another auditor pulled the pre-departure checklist. It had been submitted 14 minutes after the vessel left port. A small gap, but not small to an audit. They added another note. Paxton began unraveling in a different way. No shouting now, no finger pointing. He spoke softly, almost pleading, suggesting system errors, software glitches, and syncing issues. But the auditors asked the technical team to confirm, and Wilson stepped forward. Wilson did not look at Paxton. He opened the system logs in front of the auditors, his finger tracing each line of history, each one carrying the name of the user who made the changes. "There are no system errors," Wilson said quietly. "No syncing issues. Every edit was made manually by a user. The system worked perfectly, just not in the direction the boss hoped." A thin smile passed across a few faces in the room. Not mocking, just the kind of smile that comes when truth finally lands exactly where it should. As for me, in Sedona, I was learning how to brew herbal tea from an elderly woman at a small market. She said the water had to be just the right warmth, not too hot, or the leaves would lose their scent. I stirred the pot, listening to wind slip through the window, feeling a calm I had not felt in years. My phone lay face down, notifications off. But I knew the auditors were still opening files back at Borealis, shining a bright light on every trace Paxton had left, and I felt no urgencies to return. There was no need. They needed me to patch the numbers they broke, and I needed an afternoon where no one mentioned a single log. I smiled, pouring warm water into the teapot, thinking to myself, they need me. I need quiet. Everyone wants something different. When the audit team finished their first round of checks, they did not say much. But that silence alone made everyone at Borealis uneasy. Only a few hours later, the board of directors called for an emergency meeting. No virtual attendance, no delays. An in-person meeting on the 12th floor, in the boardroom reserved only for matters serious enough to shake an entire organization. Paxton was summoned. According to the people who witnessed it, he walked in trying to keep his expression under control, but the wrinkled sleeve and crooked tie said everything his face did not: haste, or maybe despair. The board sat in a long row, no raised voices, no anger. That quiet was the most dangerous sign of all. There was no friendly opening. No, thank you for coming. The meeting chair, Harriet Bloom, opened the folder in front of her. She did not look at Paxton as she turned the page. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice steady and sharp, "before us is the official email you sent regarding the immediate termination of employee Elaine Carter while she was on approved leave." She placed the printed email at the center of the table. Black ink on white paper, every word crisp. No one touched it, but its presence alone made the room feel heavier. Paxton swallowed and attempted a smile. "I understand. But I want to clarify that the email may have been interpreted differently by the system than what I intended." A board member, Francis, a man with more than 3 decades of experience in legal investigations, paused for a beat before responding. "The system." His head tilted. "You are saying the system generated your phrasing for you?" The room went silent, the kind of silence that hides small, suppressed smiles behind lowered eyes. Not laughter, simply disbelief. Paxton opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His expression froze, the look of a man realizing he had taken one step too far down a slope. Harriet folded her hands together, tone unchanged. "We have reviewed the logs. The email was sent from your account, from your office, with a matching IP and a complete electronic signature. There is no indication that the system created anything on your behalf." Paxton tried again. "What I mean is, I was misunderstood. I only intended to request assistance, not terminate her employment." Another board member, Lenora, the legal expert, placed her pen on the table. "If you did not intend to terminate her," she said, "why does the email contain the phrase effective immediately? No system inserts that on its own." Paxton fell silent again. His head lowered, but his hands, tight, restless, told the truth his voice could not. When a person runs out of excuses, their hands usually speak first. The board gave him no room to recover. Harriet turned to the next folder, the summary of the first audit session. Mismatched data, unlawful alterations, Slack communications, everything neatly tabbed with yellow notes. "Mr. Hale," she said slowly, "the audit team found data adjustments inconsistent with operational reality, and according to initial statements, you urged employees to make these edits." Paxton shot to his feet, voice sharp. "That is a misunderstanding. This was internal formatting. I never instructed anyone to alter operational data." Francis reached to his side, lifted another sheet of paper, and set it gently on the table. "This is the original Slack message," he said, "along with the time-stamped edits that followed immediately after your instruction. Do we call this a coincidence, or do we call it what it is?" Paxton stared at the page as if hoping it would disappear. He opened his mouth twice, but no words formed. Then he leaned back, shoulders sinking, like someone who finally realizes he has no distance left to run. The board exchanged a few looks. No dramatic gestures, just small, quiet nods, the kind that ends careers. Harriet closed the folder. "Mr. Hale, based on the evidence presented, the violations of federal regulations concerning data manipulation, and the misuse of executive authority, the board is suspending all of your duties effective immediately. No gavel, no applause. But the impact of her words was louder than either. Paxton sat frozen, his expression stiff, like a man who had played captain for too long and just discovered he had been drilling holes in his own ship. A board member rose to end the meeting, but before leaving the room, he paused and offered one last, needle-sharp line. You should have reviewed that email before sending it, especially an email capable of sinking your own career, and that was the end of it, clean, cold, and leaving no space for hope. As for me, in Sedona, I was still stirring herbal tea while an elderly woman explained how the water had to be at just the right warmth. I breathed slowly, exactly the way she told me to, unaware that at that very moment, Paxton's career had just been stopped by a single calm sentence. Right after Paxton was suspended, Borealis slipped into the familiar state of a company that suddenly realizes it has drifted into calm water, the kind that is so deep no one can measure it. A day later, I got a call from Rebecca, the deputy head of HR. I was standing on the wooden porch of the lodge, Sedona sunlight spilling across the red cliffs like a layer of burning velvet. Rebecca left a message, her voice so gentle that if you did not know the situation, you would think she was apologizing for misplacing a file, not for firing someone illegally. Elaine, we believe we should speak again. There may have been a misunderstanding in the process. We hope to find a positive direction for both sides. I smiled. Big organizations love the word misunderstanding. It is their multi-tool used to patch mistakes, erase mistakes, or push mistakes onto someone more convenient. I sent Margot a short text. They reached out. Her reply came instantly. Send the number. With Margot, every word feels like a step she had already planned. I forwarded Rebecca's number and went back to my painting, brushing more color into the half-finished Sedona sky. The sky was still a shade of deep orange, but the air around me felt like I was standing on solid ground. And Borealis was not. About an hour later, Margot forwarded me a copy of the email she sent to HR. The moment I read the first line, I knew Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. To Rebecca, I represent Elaine Carter. No softening, no courtesy buffer, just a boundary drawn in ink. From now on, Borealis speaks to Margot, not to me. The next sentence hit the center of the issue with no cushioning. Clause 11C has been validly triggered. Your center is required to pay the full compensation as signed, along with the late penalty amount outlined in the attached schedule. Margot quoted the clause exactly, every period and comma in place. Not to explain, just to remind them this was not a negotiation. This was enforcement. Deadline, 72 hours from receipt of this email. Nothing more. No, hoping for cooperation. No warm closing. Her message landed like a gavel on a wooden desk. Firm, clean, cold. Rebecca replied quickly, typing at a speed born only from panic. Margot, we want to resolve this in good faith. Can we discuss adjusting the penalty or extending the timeline? Margot answered with the heaviest sentence in any negotiation. No. One word, one period, no surface to grab onto. Then came the part that made me nod. Pure Margot, sharp with a hint of dry humor. Clause 11C contains no section for extension, adjustment, or exception. I recommend reviewing the contract that your center approved. Rebecca tried again. Does Elaine need to complete any confirmation forms? Margot responded, no. The process does not require my client to complete any action. All obligations fall to your center. No raised voice, no triumph. Just someone stating the truth everyone knew but hoped to avoid. She then sent the attachments, the timeline, the penalty table, and the requirement for federal notification. A neat package designed to make any HR professional understand one thing. This was not the moment to negotiate a single syllable. A moment later, Margot texted me, done. I did not ask what. Margot only uses that word when the outcome is final. That evening, while I brewed herbal tea, my phone lit up with a bank notification. A large transfer had hit my account. Full compensation, salary, and every accumulated penalty. They made the payment in less than 8 hours after Margot's email. I was not surprised. People swimming in calm water never realize how deep it runs. People like Margot, who know exactly where the drop off begins, only need to touch the surface for the water to start spinning. I texted her, "They paid." She replied with 3 words, as expected. No bragging, no celebration, no extra sentence. That was Margot. She used the law like a scalpel. Quiet, precise, leaving a cut so clean no one could pretend it was not there. I set my phone down and looked at the painting. The Sedona orange had begun spreading across the whole page. There was something complete about that moment, not because of the money, not because of winning, but because someone who once saw me as a pawn finally realized the board did not belong to him. At Borealis, they talked about good faith. In Ceylon, I was only trying to brew a cup of tea that was not bitter. And between those two worlds stood Margot, steady, sharp, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone forget a contract is a contract. Not even 2 days after HR sent the transfer, the Department of the Interior blew a very different kind of wind through Borealis. A full-scale review was launched, not the kind of polite end-of-year audit people ignore, but the kind that makes even the most confident employees quietly ask themselves what exactly they signed over the past 12 months. The review team arrived on a Monday morning with the calm posture of people who were not rushed and had no intention of overlooking a single detail. They requested every operations sheet, every safety procedure, and the entire edit history for all data spanning the last 3 years. 3 words in their internal memo made the whole building hum. Comprehensive review. The department does not care for surprises, but what they despise even more is when a federally funded operations center shows signs of covering up violations. When the initial findings were processed, their first action was not a meeting. It was freezing the entire 5-year federal grant package for Borealis. Equipment, staffing, training programs, deep sea research, every budget line suspended indefinitely. The email was cold, nearly emotionless. Federal funding paused. Await secondary review. No further explanation. I heard the news from Wilson, who called that afternoon. He is not one to tell stories, but after a month of chaos, maybe he needed to speak to someone far outside the current. His voice was steady, a little tired, but free of bitterness. "Elaine, they froze everything." All I said was, "I figured." Wilson exhaled, the sound like wind scraping across the old metal sheds near the docks. "We all knew something big was coming sooner or later. I just never thought it would start with an email." Meanwhile, Paxton, the man who once walked the center's halls with an overconfident stride, was seen leaving through the side exit, carrying only a small cardboard box. No goodbyes, no explanations, no justifications. Just a quiet exit, wearing the expression of someone who finally understood that the worst downfall does not come from what others do to you, but from what you tried hardest to bury. Some whispered he had requested leave. Others thought he was clinging to the last scrap of pride. Whatever the story, the ending was the same. Paxton no longer had a place inside Borealis. Wilson watched him cross the empty concrete lot, sunlight stretching long gold lines across the pavement. He turned to the person beside him and said softly, but loud enough for a few to hear, "There are waves that can sink a ship without ever touching the ocean." No one answered. They did not need to. His words were clean, true, and painful enough for everyone who had witnessed the story from start to finish. As for me, in Sedona, I watched the late light slide across the red stone cliffs. What happened to Borealis did not make me happy, but it did not sadden me either. It simply reminded me that in this world, some waves are created by people themselves, and sometimes a single wrong email is enough to reveal an entire ocean of trouble beneath the surface. After everything that happened, life has a strange way of opening a new door at the exact moment you think all the others have closed. A month after the Borealis mess, when I had already slipped back into a quiet routine in Sedona, one morning I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Not HR, not an attorney, not someone trying to drag me back into a story long past its expiration date. It was from a deep-sea monitoring research center in Alaska. The tone was unlike anything I had heard from a workplace in years, unrushed, unhidden, and with no hint of desperation. "We reviewed the safety logs you oversaw in recent years. We would like to invite you to join a new project in the Kachemak region of Alaska. Calm environment, no operational pressure, and we need someone like you. Someone who understands the ocean and the value of telling the truth. I read it 3 times. The first time, I was surprised. The second time, it landed. The third time, I smiled. A week later, I packed a small suitcase, taking only what I needed and the wide-brimmed Sedona hat I bought on the first day of my vacation, the day I was fired. I kept it as a memento, but when I arrived in Alaska, it became something else entirely, a symbol of the moment I stepped out of someone else's storm. Alaska greeted me with a cold that did not make me retreat into myself, but cleared my mind. On my first morning, I walked down a foggy wooden dock and watched a few seabirds perched on the poles, calling out short, lazy greetings. In the distance, snow-covered peaks glimmered through the mist, as if deciding whether to show me the full view or keep part of their mystery to themselves. I met the new research team in a nearby cabin. They did not ask what happened at Borealis. Not a single person. They only asked what kind of tea I liked in the morning and what time I preferred to start work. It was the first time in my life that I did not have to prove my worth by juggling 3 crises at once. The first days in Alaska passed lightly. I helped them review the tracking protocols for the small vessels, finalize the log system to federal standards, and sometimes I just stood at the shoreline watching seals rise to the surface, blink at us, then disappear again as if the world held nothing to fear. In the evenings, I sat on the porch where the wind from Kachemak Bay carried salt and the soft sweetness of melting ice. I thought about the road that had brought me here, not with sadness, just with clarity, about what I had cut away and what I had chosen to keep. One day I spoke with an older team member, hair silver, voice soft as drizzle. He asked me, "Do you regret anything?" I looked toward the darkening water. "I do not regret it," I said. "I just find it strange that it took getting fired to realize how much I had endured." In the quiet moments, I realized a simple truth that is not always simple to practice. Personal boundaries are not walls we build against the world. They are the lines that tell the world which parts of us are not up for negotiation, no matter the pressure or persuasion. And another truth, sharp as the wind here, silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is how you let the truth do its work, the way melting ice can redirect an entire river without making a sound. I thought back to Borealis. They believed firing me would cover their mistake. They thought a short email could erase years of work. But in the end, they were the ones who revealed who had actually abandoned their duty. I was only trying to rest, truly rest, for the first time in 14 years. Looking back, the whole thing feels less like revenge and more like stepping out of a dark room and realizing the light had been waiting all along. Some people call that luck. I call it the result of drawing boundaries at the right moment and standing still long enough to see who steps back. Now, every morning in Alaska, I wake to thin strands of light falling across the still water. Sometimes I hear an owl calling far away. Sometimes I see a soft blue shimmer under the surface that the locals say is a school of herring passing by. Life here has no noise, no competition, no 6 a.m. meetings to fix someone else's mistakes. It is simply right. Right for me, and right for the parts of myself I fought hard to keep. If there is anything I want to leave with anyone listening to this story, it is this. Sometimes life will push you out of the place you thought you belonged. And sometimes that push leads you somewhere more peaceful than you imagined. But most importantly, remember this. Your boundaries are yours. And when someone tries to cross them, you do not have to raise your voice. You only have to stand firm. Truth will speak on its own. I end my story in the same tone I have carried through this entire journey, calm, steady, with just enough edge. They fired me to cover their mistake. All I needed was rest to see who was truly abandoning their duty. If you enjoy stories of quiet, intelligent, deeply human revenge like this one, subscribe to the channel. I have more stories that will make you angry, make you laugh, and make you nod along all at once. Thank you for listening to the end, and I hope to see you in the next story.